Okay, so this is my morning section of ARC 131. We're going to open the template file in Rhino. So this is the thing you download from Canvas, and I can fly out here and just show you again in here. This is this file that you have with a template with title block. We're going to download this template with title block, and after you've completed parts 1 and 2, you actually can understand 3, and as we move through these steps, right now we're kind of in tutorial 3 era, which is how to draft in Rhino, and I'm going to use the revealing geometry exercise from the first workshop day as a jumping off point. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to check my units, and you'll understand units more from the tutorials, but units down here say inches. They are by default inches, but I can always type in units and double check. I want to work in inches because I'm working at 1-to-1 scale. Eventually we'll work with feet as things get larger in the scale representing. Also, I have several ways I can make boxes, but I'm going to start by making a box that's a rectangle that's going to be 18 by 24. I can use the icons, or I can type in rectangle. As you see here, I can type in rectangle. And as I come out in space here, the default is going to be x-axis first, then y-axis. So I know I'm going to make a piece of Bristol paper that's 24 inches wide. So I'm constrained now 24 inches wide, and I want to be 18 inches tall, which is exactly what you guys had with the first day we laid out on our drafting boards. I also, you'll see it's right now it's green. If I come over here to my layers, I'm on lightest. At any point, I can select an object or object sets and actually right-click and change them to a layer. So if I want to now make this instead on light, since it's selected, I can say change object layer, which you'll understand from the tutorial previously. But for this purpose, I'm going to go back and change this to actually a non-plot layer called bounding box, because I don't really care about this outside piece here. But that's the piece of Bristol. For the remainder of the drafting, though, that I start out, I'm going to act like I have 4H lead, which in this purpose is going to be the lightest line weight. So I have lightest at right here selected. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make my diagonals. And as I go across here, I hit line and made a line, right? Which again, you've practiced in the previous 2 process videos. Same thing, I can hit enter again, or at any point I can type in line. I now have a line. And now if I look over here, you've noticed I've been snapping based on the snaps that were recommended to set up. I have object snaps of endpoint, midpoint, intersection, perpendicular. Vertex isn't as important right now, but project means I'm drafting on the ground. And so I can now enter this line. I've now made an X. Unlike hand drafting, I can now copy instantly. So for the purposes of this exercise, I'm actually going to copy over line work, right? I'm going to copy over, if I'm 24 inches, I'm just going to move this thing to 30 inches out. And now I have a 30-inch over, I'm moved over 30 inches, so I've got a 6-inch space in between. The second thing I want to do is actually find this middle intersection, right, which bisects the page. I want the vertical, so I click on this intersection, right? It snapped to that, comes up to perpendicular, and now I have a short line here that I want to extend. And again, this is another tool from tutorial 2. As I extend here, it asks me for my bounding box. I want to use this, or bounding object, I want to use this as my bounding box. I hit enter, select the curve you want to extend, and I've extended this curve. I now have split the page in 2. As I march along, I can keep copying now from point, so I can just pick this corner and over. And I now have another step where if I zoom in here, again, using the scroll wheel, I can zoom in and out. Again, you've already played with this in previous tutorials. But now I'm able to make the 2 vertical rectangles appear with their diagonals. And again, this should look pretty familiar from a couple weeks ago, copying over. And now we know what I have with these intersections is I have the ability to split in half here, right click again, enter line here. So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. But then also at the intersection of the larger x and the smaller x, I have split this vertically into thirds. And if I go to my extend tool, extend, select my bounding box again, enter, extend this line down, extend this line down, extend this line over, extend this line over. I now have my grid. And I'm going to again copy. And what we asked in the next step is actually to clean up those two squares in the middle. This is using the trim command. Again, something you all played with in earlier tutorials. I want to use this line, this line, this line, and this line as the ability to trim out these squares. So I select my cutting objects, enter, select my objects to trim. I click on the area I want to trim away. So from this line, I want to trim this part. From this line, I want to trim this part, this line. And I now have the clean squares. Okay, so what I do with my erasing shield, I now have the clean squares. Copy again. Base point over. I now have these clean squares, and you might recall, we now are going to start to find that golden rectangle. So I'm going to draw a circle. I could draw an arc, but I'm going to start with a circle for this one. Come over here. And you might recall, but again, to find the midpoint of any line, you just have to be larger than that midpoint. So I don't want to be my circle with radius here. I'm just going to pick this one because I have it. And then if I copy something I couldn't do the other day, I could move my compass fix, but I couldn't copy, to this other corner. I've now drawn two circles in that football shape. I can go back to trimming again. I'm going to use these two objects as trims. Pick the outside. And I've now made that line intersects at the midpoint of this square. So as you copy along, move across. And now I'm going to go back. Instead of choosing circle, I am going to do an arc with a center. So I'm going to do arc with center. So it wants the center of the arc. We know it's this line. What's its radius? We know it's up here to the upper corner of the square. So from midpoint of the base to the upper corner, one of the upper corners, we want to choose this one. And I can sweep down. I now have an arc. That arc now can be given at this endpoint a line. And if I zoom in here, this rectangle from here over to here, up and around, that's now the golden rectangle. Now that I have this rectangle, I can now just subdivide into squares the rest of the way, right? And you'll start to see the spiral form from our previous exercise. So over here, I can use the circle tool or the arc tool. I can trim it if I'd like. So I'll just trim this again so I just get that arc. Again, you'll find in Rhino there's multiple ways to do lots of these operations. There's my line. Copy again. This time I'll play with arcs now that we understand them. Center, radius, snaps over. And you'll notice that I'm snapping because I have ortho on. Ortho is overridden by any object snap, but ortho means orthographic. It goes up and down, left and right as a snap. And again, these are things that come up in previous tutorials about how to use these various tools, okay? And so as I've got this, you're starting to see those squares subdivide, but unlike your hand-drawn compass, I don't have the limitations of lead thickness. These lines never change thickness in this space. If I keep zooming in, this line stays the same thickness. So it's really nice for precision. And so if I come over, now that I've copied this, right, I can now make this other arc, snapping across, over, there's that line, and you're again, probably seeing that spiral appear. But what I'll do, because I can be so precise, I'll just do this a few more times to kind of show the difference between drafting with by hand and the pencil thickness that you have to compete with, and then the digital line weight, which can stay down to a pixel. So as I complete this part of the spiral, I think folks are starting to see that we're getting into pretty small, if this was physical space. And I'll show you just how small we are using another tool we have in Rhino in just a moment. So last arc I'll do for this part of the exercise. Come in here. And if you're wondering where we are now, right, you're seeing that keeps making the golden rectangle in the square. If I go to type distance, in reality, if I wanted to print this at 1:1, this distance is 0.334 inches. So we're not quite a quarter of an inch yet, but we're getting close. We're under a half an inch if this was printed at 1:1. And you can see, I can still see everything as if I'm inside, or as if I'm way zoomed out, right? As I move out, you can see how dense I'm getting. So what I'm gonna do to sort of finish this off is I'm gonna go one more square over, or one more piece of Bristol over, and I'll subdivide. And again, up here was just an example of how I've been marching along, kind of doing things similar to what we had done in drafting, hand drafting. As I come in again, I have the ability to control every line in every intersection. So to finish this out, you might recall, we were able to use the spiral technique, right? To be able to show it. So now I can do it almost immediate, right? So I know I want to start with this square and draw this arc. Then I want to start with this next square and draw this arc. Next square and draw this arc. And as I continue this spiral, you're watching how much faster, obviously, it is than drafting by hand, but also the precision. I'm always snapping to endpoints. I'm not competing with my compass needle, my compass point, right? So there's a trade-off. So as I come in now, maybe I want to reinforce this spiral. So using the shift command, right, I can come in, select all the arcs I just drew, and switching from 4H lead, I can actually come over here to dark, click on that layer and say change object layer. I now have red. That'll be a darker, thicker line weight when I start to export, and I have my thinner guidelines. But maybe I also want to play with the fact that I just drew these squares. So I can come in here, go to medium, and maybe I want to use slightly lighter line weight. And I'm just hitting enter to subdivide. And now I have a slightly thicker line, that medium, and that will pop. That'll be a thicker piece than the other sort of guideline geometry. The last thing we can do was hatching. And it's exactly what we did when we were playing with the drafted hatches you guys did. We can actually type in hatch, and it says select curves. Do I want to select a boundary, or do I want to have instead do a filled region, right? So I could do this, and hit enter, and say which regions do I want to keep. So I've selected these. I selected all these because I want to make sure I'm filling this region. So you notice how I click on it, it shows me where it would be active. And I could click other regions. I'm just going to keep this one for now. Hit enter, and it comes up with options of hatching. So I'll pick hatch 1 because it's an even vertical hatch. And I'll click apply. But I'm also looking to go to lighter lines. So I could come back here and change object layer to lighter lines. So I actually have a lighter hatch. If I want to repeat this, right, select my curve. So maybe I want to do this triangle over here. I can do a crossing window, grab all of these, pick a region, enter, and maybe this time I'm going to switch from horizontal to vertical. And again, I can come back over and go to change object layer, and now I have my pink hatch, right? And so that's the sort of options with hatching. And so I'll pick a couple more like you guys did. And maybe I'll take, let's see, I'll grab this because I want to grab that wedge. Pick this, and this time I'll pick solid. So this might be a flood of a color, he's exactly what it sounds like, solid. And again, I'll change it to lightest. I could have drafted on lightest. The other thing you want to play with is I can select these hatches, and I can right click, click these guys. And I can send to back. And that's exactly what it sounds like. I've sent it behind these other lines. So I make sure that I have the hatch and the line piece there. And so why don't I fill out one more? We did 4 the other day in our class. So let's see, I'll pick a compositional balance somewhere. How about I'll come right down here. So here's this guy, hatch, but now I can come down and maybe I'll pick this 60-degree grid like we had before. We play with this some, and I'll change object layer. And if I come back here, at any point, I can edit hatches via property. I can change the pattern, change the scale. So maybe I want this to be a little bit denser. And I now have this ability here, and I can make sure again to send it to back. And so now as you step back, zooming out, I now have the ability to look at the entire stage build I did, which is how I built out your assignment to begin with. I built it out in Rhino so we could walk through each step. But this resultant product, I'm going to ask my studio, for those of you watching this in other studios may be a little different, to now export this. Right? So I can go to printing, file print, which is again another tutorial. I'm going to pick paper size, Arch C 18 by 24, and I want to be a Rhino PDF. I want to be vector output because I drew only lines anyway, so I'm going to do vector. My output color is going to be the print color that's assigned. And I'm going to do top view because that's what I'm drafting in. We're drafting in 2D this quarter. And I'm going to pick a window that snaps to here, and I hit enter. It shows me a preview. My scale wants to be 1:1. It happens to fit that way, but 1:1. Always check that. Your scales are what you want. I want to be 1 inch equals 1 inch. And I'm now set up. It tells me 1 inch on paper is 1 inch in the model. When I hit print, I'll do it, revealing geometry test for mine, labeling it really, and I come here, and I'm using a Mac, so this is preview, and there I have a set of lines that are there, okay? So it's a really interesting sort of discussion around process-based things in terms of digital versus analog, but you can see that in the end, you have the ability to control everything from hiding things, showing things, which you've done in other things, the hatches that we can fill regions with, and most importantly, you can reiterate, undo, and just copy infinitely. Okay, so we'll call that process video over, and happy drafting.